Hello, my name is Catherine Van Tassell, and I'm the Director of Mental Health Consulting here at GBS. For our Mental Health Minute this month, I wanted to talk about CBT and introduce you to a core tool that you can use to help reduce anxiety. Many people are experiencing higher levels of anxiety. And so I thought it would be nice this month to give you one actionable item with a worksheet that you could use to start working on decreasing um, anxious thoughts, ruminative thoughts, or just working on overall anxiety. So, to get started, I just wanted to talk about the core concept of CBT. So, essentially, CBT is one of our first line therapy tools that we use to help people regulate emotion. So many things happen to us daily. There are all these events that happen, and we have an emotion about that. So, how do we feel? Does it give us happiness, joy, or does it make us sad, angry? There's a whole range of emotions that we experience throughout the day. And we have these thoughts of how we feel, what we think about. And this could be different. The same event could happen to different people. They would have a different emotion about that. They would have a different thought, and then they would act in a different way. Now, for some of us, think about some of your number one anxiety producing events. And think about the small ones because we have small ones like, what am I going to make for dinner? I don't want to make dinner. I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to do X. And then we have larger anxiety producing events. So think of some of these, whether they're small or large. How do you feel about them and what are your thoughts? Now, depending on what those are, you then will act in a certain way. And that could be avoidance. That could be, I'm going to tackle this right away. It could be a number of things. So here's the tool we're going to talk about today to help you not avoid. And this is what many of us do because we don't want to face what's creating that anxiety, right? Well, unfortunately, when we do that, we get in this cycle, this anxiety trap. So let's just look at this. Again, there's a situation that triggers a response. So think about you. What are situations that trigger your anxiety response? And you can have thoughts. We can get physical feelings, headache. We carry a lot of stress in our shoulders and our back, so neck aches, back aches, and then your feelings. So, our thoughts. We can have thoughts that are out of proportion with the event. We essentially build something up so much and we get a fixation on the worst case scenario. And then we doubt our ability to cope with it. And I talked about physical symptoms, getting into this fight or flight. This could be shallow breathing, a racing heart, shaking, sweating, etc. And then the emotion that goes along with that. Be really irritable or restless, feelings of dread. Then what do we do? Well, nobody wants to feel any of these ways, have the physical sensations, thoughts, or feelings here. So now I don't want to feel that way. What am I going to do? I'm going to avoid it. If I just don't think about it, if I just don't do it, if I push it off, if I do something else like doom scroll on my phone, maybe watch TV, do anything else, we find ourselves cleaning, scrubbing the toilet just so we don't have to do X activity. So we avoid the anxiety trigger to escape those uncomfortable feelings. And thinking about all sorts of examples, this could be I really want to go on a vacation with my friends or family, but I'm terrified of flying. Um, Social anxiety can be debilitating for some people. So they will misuse substances, alcohol or other substance to loosen up, be able to interact. Or one of the most common that all of us, I'm sure, have guilty of doing is just procrastinate. I'm just going to push it off, push it off. And in the short term, that that's good. It feels good for us, right? And I think it's really important that we give some grace when we participate in these activities that avoid. It's not that we're doing this thinking, "Oh, this is going to solve all of our problems." We just don't like feeling yucky. And so I'm doing something to release that tension. Sure, now we get some short-term relief. But then what happens? You miss out on that vacation, or you can be addicted to substances, or the task that we put off, that we procrastinated, we miss our deadline, it gets bigger. Now we're having to do it at midnight. It creates even more anxiety, right? And so this is what we see, this intensification. We got a momentary lapse, but now everything's worse. And our brain is so interesting. What we do on repetition, our brain, it's called neuroplasticity. Essentially, we lay down these tracks and they just become habits. So we do them without even thinking. So now I have an anxiety response and I immediately procrastinate. We don't want that to be our immediate behavior. So again, kind of like brushing our teeth, many of us get up, well, I hope all of us, we get up first thing in the morning, we brush our teeth without even thinking about it. That's from time and time and time and time of repetitive behavior, right? We can do the same thing here. So instead of associating that avoidance with feeling better, we face a similar situation with a different solution. And the more we do that, the more it will just become second nature. So instead of giving up on taking our vacation, substance use, or doing poorly in our work, school, etc. tasks, we now face that. Okay, how can we start to do that though? Easier said than done, right? You will have a link to download this worksheet on challenging anxious thoughts. So, knowing that anxiety can be a healthy emotion. Sometimes we tend to have labels on emotions, whether they're negative, positive, good, etc. So happiness being good, anger being bad, joy being good, and sorrow or sadness being bad. Well, here's the thing. Some of these, what we would put in the category of bad emotions, like anger, for example. Anger can be very motivating if used appropriately. This makes me mad. I'm going to do something about it, right? So thinking that anxiety is not necessarily a bad emotion, it's one, how we view it, and two, what we do with it. So instead of it being, I'm going to procrastinate, I'm going to avoid, I may use substances, etc., I'm going to focus on this and why. Again, remember what my thought and emotion is about this to change my behavior, that CBT. So I want you to just write down an example of things that trigger your anxiety. Write down something small and something big. Give yourself two to work on this month. And then understanding that anxiety distorts our thinking. So we can overestimate the outcome. We can catastrophize, um, imagine that something's going to go wrong, etc., right? This I call our stinking thinking. So we really get these cognitive distortions. So I want you to imagine you are faced with your own personal anxiety producing situation. And I want you to write down what would be the worst outcome, what would be the best outcome, and what's the most likely outcome. And then imagine the worst outcome comes true. Okay, the number one thing I'm worried about. Would it still matter in a week from now, a month from now, or a year from now? So, a couple of things. Again, we tend to distort negative emotions in our brain, and we think it is going to be the worst outcome. And that's typically not true. For the majority, I would say about 90+% of the things that have happened to us, it hasn't been the worst outcome. That most certainly doesn't mean that that's always what's going to happen. But in general, we usually have a likely outcome, right? And the other thing I really like to tell people is that you've survived 100% of your worst days. The worst days you've ever had, you have survived them. And some of those still impact you today. Um, and you need to work through them or whatever that looks like for you. But for the majority of them, they're kind of not a big deal. They happened, you moved on, maybe you use some tools, some therapy. They haven't continued to come with you. That for the most of us would be the majority. So again, thinking about your anxiety, the small and the big that are most common for you is what's the most likely outcome? And then if the worst outcome were to happen, is it really going to matter in a week and a month and a year? Essentially, we're working on those cognitive distortions to reality check. And that's a very powerful tool. Then using your worst outcome and your likely outcome from above, I want you to think about that. So, what was the irrational thought? Why were you thinking that this would be the worst thing that happens to you? And sometimes that could be, well, I think it's always going to be the worst thing that happens to me. Why? Why is that? And that's a good area just to do some self-exploration. Maybe this would be a good opportunity to involve yourself with, or find a therapist or talk to your therapist about this exercise if you currently have one. And then again, reality check. Have some rational thoughts. So that the next time this comes, and the more you practice it, you're going to go to that rational thought, what's the most likely outcome, and then you won't find yourself in this anxiety trap, feeling like I have to avoid. Now I know that I can challenge my thinking errors. I can face this anxiety, and the more I practice, the less that is going to become a burden for me. I hope this was helpful. And I thank you for spending some time with me today.